The Beehive state has just passed one of the biggest internet bills you've never heard of. No coffee, no sex, no problem. Utah's got interoperability. So today, much of the internet is organized into walled gardens. Most people spend time viewing user-generated content through various platforms, such as Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, or X. In these walled gardens, you can only engage with others inside of that garden. For example, if you're in X's garden but your friend is on Blue Sky, well, too bad. That is, unless you live in Utah. With the passage of the Digital Choice Act, the state of Utah has mandated the interoperability of social media platforms, requiring companies to open up their walled gardens. Essentially, Utah is sending a message to social media platforms.
Mr. Zuckerberg,
tear down this wall.
Thanks, Ron. So this video is going to talk about a new regulation that was passed and signed into law in March of 2025 called the Digital Choice Act. After a quick summary, first we're going to talk a little bit about the history and the background of the bill, how it came to exist, and then we're going to dig a little bit into the legal details, kind of explain exactly what the law does, and then finally we're going to explore the broader implications of this policy and try to understand what the concept of interoperability represents to a data ecosystem. Hi, my name is Dr. Brett Aho. I recently received my PhD from the University of California, Santa Barbara, where I researched data policy. This video is part of a series of videos in which I will explore some of the more interesting things happening around the world in the exciting field of internet governance. Thanks for watching. So, before we dive into the weeds, I just want to give you a quick overview. The Digital Choice Act was signed into law in the US state of Utah in March of this year. It currently represents one of the world's most ambitious pieces of social media regulation, requiring social media platforms to build an interoperability interface, which is essentially an API that allows user data to flow both in and out of the platform. Theoretically, this would allow users to access social media platforms through third-party apps, which could aggregate content from multiple different platforms and could allow users to curate their own social media feeds. So the explicit goal of the law is to provide users with greater choice over the content that they view. Most platforms currently curate user content according to internal algorithms such that the content you see is primarily decided by the platform. However, through this API, consumers can make their own decisions about the content that they see. Third-party platforms could offer alternative algorithms which curate content according to metrics that consumers can exercise power over. So, imagine if you had all of your social media feeds brought together in a single place, with various tools that would allow you to alter the algorithms that determine what kind of content you see. For example, maybe you would want to turn the cat videos levered up to 11. Or maybe you would want to turn down the thirst traps a little bit, maybe to 4. The law essentially frees Utahans from having a singular algorithm which controls the content that they see. So thinking a little bit broader about social media markets, this interoperability has the potential to reinvigorate competition between recommendation engines, challenging entrenched monopolies and giving consumers more choice over their internet experience. So when does the law kick in? Well, the way that it's written, if the API isn't functional by July 1st, 2026, the platform will have to pay up to $2,500 per violation. But, as we'll discuss more later, big tech is unlikely to simply roll over and accept the will of Utahans. We can expect some legal challenges. So, the bill came into being thanks to the efforts of Utah Governor Spencer Cox, Utah State House Representative Doug Fiafia, I had to look up how that was pronounced, and Project Liberty, an initiative founded by billionaire Frank McCourt, which seeks to create a more people-powered internet. The group is perhaps best known for the People's Bid for TikTok, and this is an initiative which seeks to buy TikTok and reform it in a manner which increases transparency and user choice. So Project Liberty has actually emerged as a pretty substantial force in the field of data politics. It's advised by some fairly impressive individuals representing both academia and civil society. This includes Dr. David Newman, director of MIT Media Lab, as well as Dan Porterfield, president and CEO of the Aspen Institute. The organization also operates a nonprofit research institute whose fellows include a lot of household names among data scholars. This includes Stanford's Eric Brynjolfsson, Marietta Schaka, as well as Michael McFall. Lots of smart people. If you're interested in Project Liberty and want to understand a little bit more about their vision for the future of the internet, I would definitely check out the policy blueprint for the People's Internet. I'll include a link to that in this video. The language of the Digital Choice Act was primarily drafted by Project Liberty, and the bill, Utah House Bill 418, was introduced to the Utah House Business and Labor Committee by former Google employee and Republican House Representative Doug Fiafia in February 2025, who, in his own words, noted,
"Big tech companies collect enormous amounts of data on us, which includes what we like, what we watch, who we interact with, and use it to create algorithms that keep us hooked. That data is then sold to advertisers for billions of dollars, and I quickly realized that we are not the customer, we are the product. These companies are literally selling our free will for profit margin. The more time we spend on their platforms, the more money they make. But here's the problem: users don't have control over their data. These companies make it extremely difficult to leave because they lock in social connections, our history, and our digital lives. If you want to switch to a new platform that offers better privacy, better features, aligns more with our values, you often can't take your data with you. This isn't just an accident, it's intentional. Companies design their platforms to limit competition and keep users from leaving, and it's time we do something about it."
So, surprisingly, the bill actually faced relatively little resistance as it's made its way through the Utah State Legislature. The bill was passed by the Utah House of Representatives 64-1 to 10 on February 21st, and then it was passed by the Utah Senate with a vote of 20-5 to 4 on March 5th, and it was signed into law then already on March 27th, 2025 by Governor Cox. Two other noteworthy champions of the bill were Ancestry.com co-founder Paul Allen, as well as Dr. Jonathan Haidt, author of The Anxious Generation, which I'm sure some of you have heard of. So, diving into the law itself, the law explicitly regulates social media services defined as a public website or an app which displays content not made by the company, allows users to create profiles, allows users to interact socially, and allows users to post content viewable by others. This includes Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky, YouTube, TikTok, Reels, Reddit, MySpace, Pinterest, LinkedIn, Discord, Twitch, and beyond. This is a really broad-reaching policy. Unlike other social media laws, which explicitly target only large platforms with millions of active users, the Digital Choice Act actually has no platform size minimums. So even if you're a new social media startup, if you have users in Utah, you'll have to build the API. However, the law explicitly does not include email, cloud storage, or document viewing, sharing, or collaboration services. So, the law mandates two new features in Utah's data ecosystem: data portability and interoperability. Data portability is the slightly less exciting part of the bill, and basically requires companies to provide an individual with a copy of their social graph in a format which is portable and readily usable. Basically, this would allow Utahns to more easily move their data between similar platforms. Data portability, it's already a relatively common feature within more progressive data ecosystems. The GDPR, for example, has mandated data portability in the EU and the UK since 2018, and Californians have enjoyed this right since 2020 thanks to the CCPA. Other data portability laws that I'm currently aware of include those in Australia, Brazil, Quebec, China, Switzerland, Colorado, and Virginia. I'm sure there's more out there. These are just the ones that I have seen come up. So the really exciting part of this bill is the part that mandates interoperability. As far as I'm aware, no other jurisdiction in the world has yet passed a full-blown interoperability law. Utah, of all places, is the first. Exciting things happening in the Beehive state, including their new flag, which was just adopted in 2024. Nicely done. So, the Digital Choice Act mandates that social media platforms develop a third-party accessible API called an interoperability interface. This API is required to share a common set of the user's data between social media services designated by the user. And it also enables third parties to access content created by users and to be notified when new or updated content is available. So basically, when a user uploads content to one platform, they'll be able to simultaneously have that content shared with all of their other platforms. The law requires social media companies to utilize an open protocol, meaning publicly available with no licensing fees or patents, and this protocol should facilitate interoperability and synchronous data sharing with other social media services. The law also includes a number of provisions related to data privacy and security, and obviously requires user consent before data is shared through an API, but as the law states, the method of providing consent must be, quote, accessible, prominent, and persistent. So, basically, when uploading content, a user would either be presented with a prompt, or they would have to check a box to allow that content to travel outside the platform. Perhaps noteworthy for the state of Utah is that there's an explicit provision that this does not apply to platforms operated by religious organizations, as well as any organization that is tax exempt under state law. So next, I just want to talk a little bit about the implications of interoperability on data ecosystems. So in case you haven't seen my video on data ecosystems, I just want to give a brief explainer. In a nutshell, an ecosystem is a group of elements that interact with one another. Ecosystems can be large, like a rainforest, or they can be tiny, like plankton swimming in a puddle. Ecosystems are made up of complex relationships between various organisms. The networks that these create can be studied in order to better understand interdependencies and flows of nutrients. Data ecosystems function in a very similar way. Humanity now exists in increasingly influential socio-technical ecosystems in which data flows structure our societies. My research seeks to understand data ecosystem dynamics, analyzing how changes in data governance alter the function of societies. So, bringing it back to the Digital Choice Act, if you remember at the beginning of the video, I talked about how most of the internet currently exists as a series of walled gardens in which platforms restrict their users to the content that's available on their own platform. What this law does is it essentially turns these walled gardens into open neighborhoods, divided not so much by walls, but rather by fences with permeable gates. The interoperability interfaces mandated by the Digital Choice Act would fundamentally change the way the internet looks. We've become so accustomed to the status quo that it's actually kind of hard to wrap your head around. It actually reminds me a bit of Plato's allegory of the cave. If you've spent your whole life chained up in a cave, it's kind of difficult to conceptualize other realities. However, it's important to note that platform interoperability is not a brand new concept. When I was growing up, I would actually come home from school every day and log into at least 3 different instant messaging platforms so that I could chat with my friends. This was before the era when kids had cell phones. These were the days of the IM wars, the instant messaging wars, when AOL, MSN, Yahoo, ICQ, and a handful of others were competing for platform dominance. In 2002, I was stoked when I discovered a new program called Trillion, which was a third-party messaging super app which brought together all of my accounts across platforms and let me chat with all of my friends from a single interface, regardless of what platform my friends were using. Great for consumers. The program actually had 5 million downloads in the first 6 months. However, soon AOL realized that their users were chatting with their friends without the AIM client, and this basically kicked off a corporate game of whack-a-mole. Basically, companies kept trying to block Trillion by updating their apps, and then Trillion would respond by quickly releasing a patch to fix it. Trillion actually still operates today and continues to support interoperability between instant messaging services. Bringing it back to the mandated interoperability of social media platforms in the Digital Choice Act, from my perspective, one of the most exciting implications is that it opens up the potential for the emergence of new third-party apps, similar to Trillion, which would aggregate user-generated content from other platforms, and it would provide users with new options for tweaking and managing their media feeds. So, under the way that social media platforms currently operate, users have very little power over the algorithms that feed them content. As you're scrolling through the social media feeds on your phone, you don't actually have a lot of agency over what media you're being shown. The platform itself is making a lot of decisions about what it wants you to see. The recommendation engines which determine your content streams currently operate according to metrics that first and foremost serve the interests of the company, rather than the interests of users. Social media addiction is prevalent and is buoyed by algorithmic content feeds which are designed to keep eyeballs on the platform. In the social media business, attention translates to profit. Interoperability would allow for users to explore receiving content through alternative algorithms whose interests and values may be in closer alignment with their own. Again, third-party apps develop alternative social media algorithms which are designed to maximize metrics that are not tied with the maximization of shareholder value. This is of particular importance for adolescents. The content feeds that platform algorithms have crafted for many teens have been demonstrated to contribute to adverse mental health outcomes. So, beyond the individual, interoperability has the potential to also address many of the harms and risks that unregulated social media platforms pose to societies. Much has been written about how content algorithms have contributed to political polarization and radicalization. Facebook, in particular, has faced substantial backlash for algorithmically amplifying harmful content. In Myanmar, for example, Facebook allegedly helped to amplify a number of false narratives that contributed to a genocide. Last year in the UK, Facebook's algorithms amplified some misinformation, which helped to spark a series of anti-immigration riots. And much of the whole post-truth phenomena can be directly linked to algorithmic media feeds, which profit through the spread of falsehoods. Political polarization, civil discord, misinformation, and extremism have all increased substantially over the past decades. In my opinion, the social media algorithms which instrumentalize controversy to maximize platform metrics represent a noteworthy piece of that puzzle. It might sound like a stretch, but interoperability might actually represent a potent tool for preserving democracy. Economically speaking, interoperability has the potential to challenge big tech monopolies and spark a host of new social media startups. Competition between content algorithms may eventually lead to new innovations in media consumption, potentially leading to new economic sectors. Consider, for example, the potential for something like modular algorithms. Maybe you have one optimized for slow long-form reading, another tuned for breaking news that it knows that you are interested in, and maybe a third designed by mental health nonprofits designed to minimize doom-scrolling triggers. With interoperability, third-party platforms could offer new dimensions of sociality to media feeds, where you and a close group of friends could intentionally sync up your content feeds. There's a lot of potential for innovation. Instead of maximum brain rot, algorithmic content feeds could perhaps even be designed to improve mental health. With enough data, over time, maybe one day, therapists and mental health professionals might even be able to prescribe certain algorithmic products designed to help maximize user well-being. Who knows? I really believe that user-generated content is one of the incredible gifts that the internet has created. Look at the explosion of content that has become available over the past 10 years. Our brains love media, And social media has been a really effective way to dramatically increase the quantity and diversity of media available for human consumption. But, as Cory Doctorow has so cleverly highlighted, enshittification has settled in. We've become somewhat trapped by greedy corporations whose interests are primarily tied with the maximization of shareholder value. So, unfortunately, it currently seems unlikely that the Digital Choice Act will come into force as it is, even if it does represent the will of Utahans. Democratic will sometimes feels a bit irrelevant in the context of US regulatory politics. Utahns are no strangers to this. In 2023, the state passed the Utah Social Media Regulation Act, which sought to impose a set of restrictions on how social media platforms served minors. The bill would have also required social media platforms to verify the age of users and obtain parental consent for users under 18. However, thanks to the efforts of NetChoice, which is an industry trade group representing big tech, the law was blocked by a federal judge based on his understanding that the law violated social media companies' free speech rights. Now, I'm no originalist, but I do kind of wonder what the framers of the Constitution would think about that. In the case of the Digital Choice Act, legal challenges might deploy a similar strategy. Other possibilities include an invocation of the Interstate Commerce Clause, or else Congress may pass a law which supersedes that of Utah. In any case, we can fully expect this to result in an intentionally slow legal challenge. Utahans will most likely have to wait quite a bit longer before they can enjoy the fruits of interoperability, should democracy prevail. You might be thinking, oh no, these poor companies, how are they still going to operate? Remember, social media platforms themselves don't actually make any of the content that you like. Other users create the content. Platforms just provide the tubes that the content flows through. They're essentially infrastructures. Their added value lies primarily in their algorithms, and if their algorithms aren't serving your interests, well, part of the problem with monopolies is that they don't really have to innovate. Because of the power of social media's network effects, they're able to keep users on their platforms, even while the quality of the services they provide deteriorates. Network effects, of course, are a function of size. If everybody is already at party A and nobody is at party B, it's going to be really difficult to get people to switch parties. Even if party A kinda starts to suck, at least I can still hang out with my friends. Interoperability changes the party landscape and gives users a sort of all-access pass to the whole festival. It's a radical change to the whole ecosystem and holds a lot of potential to facilitate innovation. So, my personal take on the law, I think it's good for consumers, I think it's good for society, I think it's good for markets, and I think it's good for innovation. I think the main losers to this policy are the monopolists who want to continue to treat human attention as a product to sell to advertisers. Or, using the language of Shoshana Zuboff, the losers are those who seek to advance an extractive model which packages personal data into behavioral futures to sell to the highest bidder. Outside of Utah, interoperability has been a topic of debate that's increasingly moving into the mainstream. There's a lot of different ways to do interoperability, such that whole literature has emerged on the topic. Sometime in the future, maybe I'll try and make a video which does a more comparative analysis of different interoperability strategies. But in any case, for today, I'm just going to leave it there. Thanks for watching and have a beautiful day.